If reality is so much greater, so much more expansive and rich and wonderful, so much more wonderful than the thought-created reality bubble that we create around ourselves. So if reality is so much more wonderful than our subjective reality, which is our interpretation of it, then why do we suffer from paranoia? Why does the self have such a very hard time about expanded consciousness? Why does consciousness appear as such a terrible demon? Because very often it does. So an expansion of consciousness can reduce in a situation where we're amazed in a good way, but it seems there's a bias operating in the opposite direction, that this becomes a very frightening thing indeed. Reality is our enemy. It manifests, it takes up the guise of a particularly ruthless enemy. It's definitely the case that the mystics do say our everyday situation is impoverished, not up to much, pretty crappy. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, it's not that you live in impoverishment, but that you are that impoverishment. C.S. Lewis uses the example of some kids living in the inner city, deprived inner city kids, maybe back in Victorian times. So they're playing in the gutter and there's sewage running down the streets, and they're playing, making little mud castles. Happily enough, playing as kids play. And he says something to the effect, though this isn't the right quote, that if you were to tell them and say, well, hey, look, you could go to the beach and lovely clean sand and seagulls and the sea, and it'd be so much nicer, the kids would laugh and say, you made that up. That's just some ridiculous story. They'd laugh in your face. And what C.S. Lewis is getting at, of course, is that that's us. If anyone reports back to us and says, hey, guess what? There's a way better reality out there. The real reality. It's much better than this crappy old place where you're hanging out. We laugh at them. And we'll do more than laugh at them. We could hound them and persecute them. We get very cross and very annoyed if they keep at it. We don't like this message. We hate it. People that come with this message, as we all know, don't generally get treated very well. Robert de Ropp talks about the myth of the Mad King, and the Mad King, he is a king, but instead of being sitting on his throne in the proper place, in the stateroom, wherever it is, where he can rule the country and do the stuff that kings have to do, he's down in the cellar. And instead of being dressed in finery, he's wearing soiled rags, and all type of unclean animal is scurrying around the floor, rats and mice and centipedes and all sorts of creatures. And he's clothed in filthy rags, and he's got an old stick that he thinks is his scepter, and he's got some filthy piece of rag on his head, and he thinks that it's his crown. As far as he's concerned, he's in his glory, and his courtiers are concerned about it. This isn't the right behaviour for a king, after all, to be insisting on wearing filth and holding court with the rats. His courtiers come down and implore him and plead with him. What are you doing down here? Put some decent clothes on, take a wash, what are you doing? But he won't hear of it. He's angry. What do you mean? I'm wearing the very best clothing. I hold my jewel-encrusted scepter in my hand, and I have my crown upon my head. And there's no telling him, basically. So again, there's the point behind this story, or behind this myth, is that that's us. We're sitting in filth when we don't have to. It's only our own perversity that means we have to do this. So this is the universal message of all mystics. And we persist in not getting it. And sometimes we kind of get it, but in a distorted way, which doesn't do us any good. So that in the Christian tradition, the idea of our true station in life is turned into this idea of heaven, where if we're good, then we'll get to go up to heaven, and then everything will be wonderful. Then everything will be great. So we're told this the whole time. People have been told that for 1,000 years. But that isn't it at all. That isn't something we win. That's not a state of being that we win by being obedient to what the church tells us God wants. If we're to be free, if we are to awaken, it has to be now, because it is now. It's no good thinking it'll happen to us when we're dead. As Kabir says, if you imagine that just because you're rotting in the grave, you'll suddenly be liberated or freed from your chains, then think again. Kind of cop onto yourself, buddies. If you don't do it now, it's not going to happen to you. It's no point leaving it till you're dead. That's not right at all. So that's what Kabir said. So the idea that reality is something we have to earn is a particularly insidious idea. So there we have it in the traditional Christian context. The earthly life is crappy, but you get to go to heaven if you're good. But also that same idea is sold to us in modern society, where we work and we do this job and we do that job. And the idea is that by passing all the tests and being good at school and doing all the rest of it, we get to win life or win reality. But if we don't have reality now, if we don't have life now, we never will. We certainly aren't going to get it all of a sudden when we retire. That's a total lie. It's a pretty stupid lie as well, because when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. But we all fall for it. So basically, this is like conditional love, where your parents say, "We'll love you if you get good grades," or "We'll love you if you jump through all these hoops." And what that means is they don't love you at all. And it's not ever going to happen, no matter how well you behave, no matter how many exams you pass, whatever university you go to. If it's not happening now, it's not ever going to happen. So we really do refuse to kind of understand this idea that the mystics are relaying to us. What are you doing in your cave? It's actually the same thing as Plato's cave, Plato's analogy of the cave. There's all these guys down there in the cave studying shadows, and your man, the prisoner, who actually gets to escape and see the real world, and how he sees the fields and the sun and the trees and the landscape, and he says, wow, this is great. I've got to go and tell my buddies down there. But he might as well talk to the wall because they think he's for the birds. They think he's lost it completely because he's telling them about a better reality. Not just a better reality, a reality that is the only reality in comparison to which our little thought-created world is as dull can be, as barren can be, as impoverished can be. And then that's also like the Buddhist story of the well frog, the frog in the well. And someone visits him to try and tell him about the sea. And he's listening to the other frog tell him that it's really big, the sea's really big. And he's saying, what, twice as big as my well? 3 times, 4 times. There's no way he's going to get there. You can't explain it to him. Though at least the well frog in the Buddhist story is willing to learn, which is kind of unusual. So the question I started off with is, if this is our situation and that reality is actually so much better than we thought it was, why does an expansion of consciousness very often produce fearful states of mind? Why does it catapult us into paranoia, into a paranoid hell state? And this kind of seems like a tough one. It just doesn't seem to make any sense, really. But what we don't understand is that the self we believe ourselves to be, this identity, can only exist in the impoverished thought-created world, because it is actually an impoverished thought. The thought of me is an impoverished thought. All thoughts are impoverished because they don't partake in reality, they're just descriptions. If I show you a menu of a fine meal, that menu is impoverished because it's not the meal. Obviously, you can't eat it, as has been said. So in the same way, the thought-created world is impoverished, and the thought-created self that we think we are is also impoverished. So really, it's very, very hard for the thought-created self to see that the world in which it lives in is so very impoverished, because it's got nothing else to go on. Compared to it, it isn't impoverished. It's okay. And actually, the thought-created identity has no way of relating to reality. The only way we can relate to reality is when we've ceased to absolutely identify with this concrete identity, this thought-created sense of self. Because our everyday self has this relationship with reality such that it can only exist when it denies reality, i.e. there's no such thing. That's pure stupid. If people try and tell you about it, that's pure stupid. So that response does make sense. It's not just pure pig ignorance or perversity. It actually makes sense because the self, the common or garden self that we understand ourselves to be, cannot survive exposure to reality. Because when we see reality, we see that the thought-created world is false, falls away. And we also see that the thought-created idea of ourselves is false, and that falls away, and that leaves us nothing to hold on to. So when we say that reality is denied, this absolutely does mean absolutely denied. We've severed our relationship with it, or possibility of relationship with it. And we've constructed a world and an idea of ourselves that can only exist when that denial is there, when the system of denial is totally in place. So from the point of view, we have to try and see things from the point of view of the self that is been created by the system of denial, the self which is itself based on denial. From its point of view, reality isn't a great thing. Reality actually is this most terrible enemy, an implacable enemy. And from this point of view, that is true, that really is true. It's not true in an absolute sense, it's just true from this point of view, which is the only point of view we know, and we have no other possibility of having any other point of view, because the self is created precisely by getting rid of all other possible ways of seeing the world. It's created by darkness, in other words, all other perspectives are cut off, all other possibilities are annihilated, all flexibility is annihilated. So when, for whatever reason, we start to become conscious, then we become aware of this thing, which we could call reality, even though we won't see it as reality. But what it is really, we're aware of its potentiality, we're aware of its nature in a way. For example, I am aware that whatever it is out there is alive, terribly alive. And not just it's alive, it's more alive than I am, as R.D. Laing says in his book, The Divided Self. The quality of life and vividness that it has is such that it would extinguish me like that in a flash. I'm afraid of that much life, of that much vividness, that much intensity. It spells the end of me. And also, we know that this enemy, call it whatever you want, the universe, consciousness, the universal mind, we know that it is intelligent off the scale. I know that it is way more intelligent than me. And it is, of course, because I'm but a poor shadow, strutting my stuff. That's all I am. The shadow knows the light is a bigger enemy than it can hope to deal with. I can't understand the potentialities that it's dealing with, but it knows how tremendous they are. So I might see this enemy that has been made itself aware, I'm aware of because of my consciousness suddenly appearing, bursting back on the scene. I know I might see it as being possibly an alien with huge technological abilities and the ability to read minds and the ability to scan and find me no matter where I am, and all sorts of other incomprehensible sophisticated abilities. Or very commonly I might identify this enemy with a planet-wide intelligence network, the CIA, the FBI, the KGB, anything like that, because these organizations are so good at monitoring. They are intelligence agencies. They gather intelligence. They know they can find you no matter where you are. And so the CIA can symbolize very well this perception that I have of what it is that I'm dealing with. And we also have this awareness that the relationship of this agency is such that we don't stand a chance against it. And not only that, but that it's pretty much already decided. Our doom has already been decided. We're not going to get out of this. it's closing in on us, and it's got all these capabilities. And I haven't got these capabilities. All I can do is run and keep fighting, postponing the moment of reckoning, postponing the day of reckoning, struggling, fleeing, hiding from this intelligence that is greater than me. And this intelligence that is absolutely dead set on destroying me or annihilating me. So that might sound strange. We might say, well, why the hell does this super intelligent being or collection of beings or entity, why does it want to destroy you? Well, what makes you so significant that you have to be hunted down by a planet-wide agency and destroyed? Or maybe even worse, maybe tortured and then destroyed. But the answer is, it's simple enough. Because when I perceive that this enemy wants to destroy me, I'm perceiving true, because the self that I believe myself to be is a fiction, and it's a lie. It's a made-up fiction. I'm too terrified to see as such. And reality itself is just another word for the truth. So the relationship of a lie to the truth is like that. If the truth gets its way, if the light shines on me, the shadow that I am will not be there anymore. So that's a true perception. It's very, very accurate. The truth does have that relationship with lies. It shows them up to be lies, and then that's the death of the lie, because the lie only gets to function when it can't be seen to be a lie. So the light is a terrifying enemy from that point of view. Now, of course, if I was able to see that I'm not that shadow, that I just mistakenly think I am, and that actually for that shadow to be annihilated would mean that I'd be free from the delusion of thinking that I'm the shadow, then that would be a different matter entirely. If I could see that I am not the shadow, that I am not this concrete identity that the mind has created, then I would realize that the conspiracy that's going on isn't a conspiracy to destroy me, but a conspiracy to free me, which is reverse paranoia. So that's what they call metanoia. So when we go around seeing that everything is a conspiracy that we can't fight against, it's a conspiracy by God, in effect, to free us, that doesn't feel so bad. That's not so terrifying. That's metanoia. We can fight as hard as we can to stop God freeing us, but he's going to win in the end. And that's metanoia. But because we are so extraordinarily attached to the concrete or thought-created idea of ourselves, absolutely attached to it, we couldn't understand in a million years how that isn't who we are, then instead of metanoia, it's paranoia that we get instead. And despite what non-paranoid people may tell you, paranoia is true. There's truth in paranoia. It's just that the truth has been turned upside down. That's all. Okay, thanks for watching.